My name is Kale Ortega, and the morning the message arrived, my coffee was still hot. That detail matters to me even now. A small, ordinary thing on the last ordinary morning of my old life. The cup sat on my desk, steam curling upward. And then the screen blinked red and my hand froze halfway to the handle. The summons was short, 3 lines. The Galactic Council wanted to see me in the Grand Hall on Vesk Prime, today. Immediately, no reason given, but I already knew the reason. I had been waiting for it for 9 years. I left the coffee where it was. I would not finish it. I would never sit at that desk again. The shuttle ride to the council world took 40 minutes, and in those 40 minutes, I tried to remember every promise humanity had made and every promise the council had broken. I counted them like beads on a string. The trade restrictions, the forced inspections, the way they laughed when our scientists spoke, the way they called our home a backwater and our people a project. I had smiled through all of it. For 9 years I had smiled because someone had to, and the job had fallen to me. The Grand Hall on Vesk Prime is built to make visitors feel small. The ceiling rises so high that you cannot see where it ends. The seats of the 47 delegation sit in tall rings above the floor, and the floor itself dips down into a single pit lit from above by a cold white light. That pit is where humans sit. It was designed 300 years ago for what they called primitive species. We were the last species still using it. Every other race had been moved up to a proper bench. We never had been. I had asked many times. The answer was always the same: soon, when you are ready. Soon. I walked into the pit alone. My boots made the only sound in the chamber above me. 47 delegations watched in silence. I could feel their eyes on the back of my neck. I did not look up. I had learned long ago that looking up only made them feel taller. Speaker Vontu of the Helithic Conclave rose to address the chamber. His body was long and pale, and his voice came through a translator that smoothed every sharp edge into politeness. He read the charges in the calm tone of a teacher disappointed in a student. Humanity had refused to share the jump drive plans we had developed last year. Humanity had declined 3 resource sharing treaties. Humanity had continued to maintain what he called outdated borders and an independent fleet. The chamber murmured agreement with every point. I listened. I did not move. I kept my hands at my sides. Then came the threat. Dressed in soft words, the council would vote in this very session on a sanctions package. Our trade routes would be frozen. Our access to 4 spiral arms would be restricted. Observers would be placed in our home system to ensure we behaved. The vote, Speaker Vontu said, was a formality. The outcome was certain. He paused after that sentence, as if waiting for me to beg. I thought about Earth. I thought about my niece in Logos, who was 8 years old and had never seen a sky without a council monitoring satellite passing over it. I thought about the 72 colonies humanity had scratched out of dust and rock across 2 arms of the galaxy. I thought about every person I had ever known sleeping under those council eyes, year after year, waiting for the day someone in this chamber would say enough. The day I realized was today, but it would not be them who said it. When Speaker Vontu finally asked for my response, I did something I had never done before in that hall. I smiled, not a polite smile, A real one, small and quiet and entirely for myself. I asked for 72 hours, a standard recess. I said to consult with my government. Before any vote, the council agreed at. Once they thought they were being generous, they thought I would return on my knees with a list of concessions. Speaker Vontu even nodded as if granting a favor to a child who had finally learned manners. I bowed my head exactly as expected and walked out of the pit. For the last time, the shuttle was waiting on the diplomatic platform. I climbed aboard and sealed the door. Behind me, the pilot was a young woman named Helen Brooks, and she had been with me for 3 years. She looked at my face and knew without asking that something had changed. I gave her the coordinates for the upper orbit, and then I sat down at the secure terminal and opened a line that had never been used before. It went straight to a small room in a building in Geneva that did not appear on any map. A voice answered on the first ring. An older man, calm, patient, waiting. I said 4 words: begin operation long night. The line clicked once and went dead. The voice did not need to ask if I was certain. The plan had been ready for 90 years. Every step had been written and rewritten by people who had been born and died waiting for this moment. I was only the one who happened to be holding the key when the lock finally needed to turn. Helen looked back at me from the pilot's seat. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. She asked where we were going. I told her to climb to the upper orbit and wait. We had time. We had 3 days and a plan that had been waiting for almost a century, and a species that had finally decided to stop asking for permission to exist. As the shuttle rose through the atmosphere of Vesh Prime, I looked down at the grand hall, smaller now from this height, just a pale ring of stone against the green of the city. I thought about the 47 delegations sitting in their tall seats, waiting for the human to come back and apologize. They would wait a long time. They would wait, in fact, longer than any of them could possibly imagine. I took out a small notebook from my coat pocket. It had belonged to my grandfather, a quiet man who had spent his life as a translator. On the first page in his handwriting were 3 lines he had written long before I was born. They were not famous. They were not poetry. They were just an old man writing down something true. The first line said, "A people who beg for their freedom will never have it." The second line said, "A people who take their freedom must be ready to leave behind everything they were." The third line said, "When the time comes, do not look back." I closed the notebook. I closed my eyes. Below me on Earth, in 72 colonies, on stations and moons and ships across 2 galactic arms, 400 million people were already moving. Quiet, calm, trained, ready. Helen brought the shuttle into a high holding pattern. Through the viewport I could see the stars of the council worlds, bright and crowded, and beyond them the deeper dark where humanity had built things the council did not know about. Shipyards in the Hewitt cloud of our own system, folded space gates hidden inside dead asteroids. An entire second civilization built quietly in the shadow of the first, designed for one purpose, and one purpose only: to carry us away. I had never been part of the building. None of us alive today had laid the first beam or written the first line of code. The plan was older than my parents, older than my grandparents. It had been started by people who looked at the council the year humanity first joined and decided in the privacy of their own hearts that they did not trust. This kindness, they had passed the plan, down generation after generation, quietly, patiently, never speaking of it, in any room that might be listening. And now, because of one quiet vote, scheduled for 3 days from now, the lock had turned. Helen asked in a careful voice what would happen next. I told her the truth. I told her that for the next 72 hours, every human in known space would move, not all at once, not in ways the council would see, but by the time my deadline arrived, by the time Speaker Vontu lifted his pale hand to call for the vote on sanctions, there would be no humans left in this galaxy for him to sanction. She did not speak for a long time, then she asked very softly where we were going. I told her I did not know, only the senior planners knew the final destination. The rest of us would follow the gates one by one and trust the people who had spent their lives preparing the way. We sat in silence. After that, the shuttle drifted in its holding pattern. The council world turned below us, and I watched the lights of its great cities come on as the night side rolled into view. Beautiful in their way, built by hands that had never known what it was to be told they were lesser. After a long time, I opened the notebook again. On the last page, my grandfather had written one more line in ink that had faded with the years. I had read it many times, but I read it again now slowly, as if for the first time. We are not a small people, he had written. We are only a quiet one, and when quiet ends, the loud will learn that they were never as loud as they thought. I closed the notebook for the last time. I put it back in my coat. I told Helen to take us to the meeting point on the far side of the moon where a transport was waiting. She nodded and turned the shuttle toward the dark. Behind us, the grand hall on Vesh Prime stood empty. The 47 delegations had gone to dinner. They were laughing, probably telling each other that the humans had finally been brought to heel, toasting Speaker Vontu for his firm hand, planning what they would say when I came crawling back in 3 days with my list of apologies. They would never get those apologies. They would never get me back at all. In 3 days, they would walk into that chamber expecting a man in a pit, and they would find the pit empty. They would call for me. They would send messengers to my embassy. They would scan my ship, and slowly, hour by hour, the truth would begin to dawn on them, and the smiles would fall from their long, pale faces, and the chamber would grow very quiet indeed. I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired and old and strangely deeply calm. For 9 years I had carried the weight of that pit. For 9 years I had smiled while my people were called primitive. The weight was gone now. I had set it down in the only place it could be set down, on the floor of the grand hall behind me, where it would stay forever. Helen brought us into the shadow of the moon. Transport was waiting, dark and silent, its running lights off. I stood up and walked to the airlock. Before I sealed my suit, I took one last look back at the bright disk of Vesh Prime, the council world, the seat of the great civilization that had spent 9 years patting humanity on the head and telling us to be patient. I lifted one hand, half a wave, half a goodbye, mostly something else. I'm not sure what to call it. A promise, perhaps a promise that they would remember this day, that they would remember the human who had asked for 72 hours and walked out of their hall and never come back, that they would remember for the rest of their long and arrogant lives. They Morning their galaxy went silent, and they did not yet know why. Then I turned and stepped through the airlock, and the door slid shut behind me with a soft, final hiss. The transport pulled away from the shuttle. The shuttle would be found later, drifting empty, just one more small mystery for the council to solve. The transport turned its nose toward home, toward Earth, toward the last quiet days of the human galaxy. Before the great silence began, I looked out the small window at the stars. I did not look back at Vesh Prime. My grandfather had told me in writing not to. I had listened to him my whole life. I was not going to stop now. My name is Myra Chen, and on the night the order came, I was sitting in the captain's chair of the colonial transport ship Far Promise, watching a child draw stars on the inside of the observation window. With her finger, the child was maybe 6 years old. Her mother was somewhere 2 decks down, packing the last of their belongings. The girl had wandered up to the bridge because she was bored, and my crew had not had the heart to send her away. She had picked the window and started drawing stars on top of stars in long crooked rows. The communication light blinked green on my console, 2 short flashes and 1 long one. Pattern I had been waiting 9 years to see. I sat very still for 1 breath. Then I stood up, walked to the comm officer, a young man named Peter Hall, and put my hand on his shoulder. He looked up. I nodded once. He nodded back. He turned to his board and began the chain of signals that would wake my fleet from its long, quiet sleep. The child was still drawing on the window. I walked over to her. I knelt down so my face was level with hers. I asked her what she was drawing. She said the way out. I asked her the way out of where. She thought about it for a moment. The way small children think with their whole faces. Then she said the way out of waiting. I did not know what to say. To that, I told her it was a fine drawing. I told her she should go find her mother. She nodded and walked away. I watched her go. I never saw her again. But I have thought about her every day since. Then I turned back to my bridge, and I gave the orders, and Operation Long Night began on the Far Promise. The way it began on every human ship and station. That night, quietly, calmly, exactly as planned. The plan was not a panic. That is the part outsiders never understood. In the years after, we did not flee. Fleeing is what frightened people do in a hurry without a destination. We had destination. We had 90 years of preparation. We moved like people, leaving a long party, gathering their coats from the closet, finding the children walking out the door without slamming it. My job was the 9th Colonial Fleet, 64 ships. My responsibility covered Draw Station, the colony of Ivani 3, and the mining belts of Hesper. Together they held about 11 million human beings. My orders were simple: get them all out, leave nothing alive, leave nothing dead, leave only the appearance of life. That last part was the strange part, the clever part, the part that had taken 90 years to build. We were not just evacuating people, we were also installing decoys. Long before that night, hidden teams had placed holographic projectors in every human city, every station, every outpost, lights that would still turn on in the evenings, shadows that would still pass behind windows, traffic patterns that would still run in the streets, controlled by simple programs, communication signals that would still broadcast routine chatter generated by simple machines speaking simple phrases in human voices. to any council censor. Scan even a careful one our homes. Would still look lived in. Dross Station was first. We pulled in on the dark side of the asteroid where the station's main docking arm faced away from the council. Patrol routes. The evacuation had already been underway for 6 hours by the time my flagship arrived. People walked from their apartments in small groups, carrying one bag each. They did not run. They did not cry. They had been told for years that this day would come, and they had been told what to bring, and they brought it: a change of clothes, a book, a photograph, one small thing that mattered. Everything else stayed behind. I walked through Dross Station once near the end to check that nothing important had been left. The hallways were empty. The shops were closed. In one apartment, the door had been left open, and I looked inside. A table was set for 3. The plates were clean, stacked neatly. A note sat on the table. It said, "Sorry for the dust. Welcome to our home. Please be kind to it." It was signed with 3 names. I do not remember the names now. I wish I did. I closed the door behind me as I left. I did not know why. It seemed like the right thing to do. Ivani 3 was harder. It was a true colony. A green world. Humans had spent 50 years terraforming, and it held 9 million people across 3 cities. We could not move that many people in shuttles. The plan called for ground-to-orbit lifts, large transports landing at municipal airfields, and a coordinated departure window of exactly 14 hours. I commanded the operation from low orbit, watching the slow stream of human lives rising from the surface in long, bright lines. The cities below me went dark, one neighborhood at a time, as the people left and the holographic systems took over. From above you could see the pattern: real lights going out, fake lights coming on, slightly slower, slightly less alive. To a casual observer, the world looked normal. To me, watching the truth, it looked like watching a candle replace another candle in the same lantern, while the real flame walked quietly out the back door. In the middle of the Yelvani operation, my second in command, a quiet officer named Owen Park, came up to me on the bridge. He was holding a tablet. He showed me a report from the city of New Geneva. A school had been found with its doors open. A teacher had refused to leave until every one of her students had been confirmed aboard a transport. She had walked through the building 4 times, calling each name, making sure no child had hidden. Only then had she boarded the last shuttle herself. I read the report twice. I asked Owen for the teacher's name. He said Ann Walker. I asked him to make sure Ann Walker had a hot meal and a window seat when she reached the far promise. He nodded and went away to see to it. That was the kind of operation it was, big enough to move worlds, small enough that you could still know the name of a teacher who walked through a school 4 times. The mining belts of Hesper were the strangest part. The miners did not want to leave their equipment. They were proud people, hard people who had spent their lives digging out a living from rocks no other species wanted. They had been told for years that the plan required leaving the equipment behind. The council must not see signs of evacuation. The mines must look as if they were still being worked. Automated drills would run in shifts, fake shift. Reports would be filed, fake, or shipments would be sent out on remote piloted barges. The miners agreed. Of course they agreed. They were not fools, but they did not like it. Many of then walked their machines one last time. Before leaving, they touched the handles, they patted the consoles. One old man named George Reed, who had been working the belt for 40 years, asked permission to leave a single screwdriver in the cab of his favorite drill. He said it would feel wrong to take it with him. He said the drill had earned it. I told him to leave it. He did. He climbed down from the cab with empty hands and walked to the transport without looking back. We left 98% of the mining equipment running, drills cycling, lights blinking, conveyor belts moving. To any passing council scan, the belt was as busy as it had ever been, only no human heartbeat anywhere in it. By hour 60, we had pulled every soul out of my 3 assigned regions. My fleet of 64 ships sat above Dross, Yelvani, and Hesper, fully loaded, every bunk filled, every cargo hold packed with seed banks and libraries and the bones of human history. We were ready, but I could not give the jump order yet. The plan called for a synchronized departure. Every human fleet in every region would jump in the same minute. That way no one would notice a single fleet leaving. There would be no slow, suspicious drain of human ships. There would only be one moment, and then there would be no human ships anywhere. I waited. The clock ticked down. The bridge was quiet. The child's drawing was still on the observation window. I had asked the cleaning crew to leave it there. Stars on top of stars in long, crooked rows. The way out. At hour 72, the synchronized signal pulsed across every human ship in known space, a single tone. 3 seconds long. I gave the order. Owen Park relayed it. The drive spun up. 64 ships of the 9th Colonial Fleet rose together, turned in unison toward the deep dark beyond the Hesper belt and folded space. When I opened my eyes again, we were in a place I had never seen before. A new system, a new sky. Great ringed gas giant turned slowly in the distance, banded in soft gold and pale blue. 3 moons hung around it, already terraformed, already lit with the small lights of new cities. This was the home that 90 years of quiet work had built. This was where we were going to live now. I stood up from my chair. I walked to the observation window. The child's drawing was still there, exactly where she had left it. Stars on top of stars. The way out, outside the window. The new stars burned, different patterns than the old sky, a sky no council telescope had ever charted, a sky that belonged for the first time in our history as a species. Only to us. I let myself cry, then only a little, only quietly. My crew did not see, and if they had seen, they would have understood. We had done it. 11 million people out of 3 regions across the human galaxy in the same minute. The same had happened. 400 million people across 72 colonies gone in a single coordinated breath. Not one lost, not one left behind. The Earth evacuation, I learned later, had been the hardest of all. 8 billion people, the cradle of our species, the planet where every human song and story had been born. The plan had been preparing the destination for 4 decades. Folded space gates the size of cities had been quietly built, atom by atom, hidden in the deep system, where no council ship would think to look. When the order came, every gate had opened at once, every transport had launched at once. The cities of Earth had emptied in 8 hours. When the last human stepped through the last gate, an automated system sealed the gate from the other side. The connection collapsed neat and final, and the way back closed forever. Earth was left behind, not destroyed, not damaged, just empty. I have thought many times about whether that was the right choice to leave Earth standing, to let it become a museum of ourselves, an empty house with the lights still on. I think the planners chose right. A burned Earth would have been a wound that never closed. An empty Earth was a message. We did not leave because we had to. We left because we wanted to. We left because we were finished waiting in the new system. Around the ringed gas giant, the work began at once. Crews unloaded, cities expanded. Children who had spent the jump asleep in their bunks woke up and looked through windows at a sky none of their parents recognized. They did not seem afraid, they seemed curious. Whole new world to learn. I walked the decks of the Far Promise one last time before going to rest. In the observation lounge, I found the little girl from the first night. She was looking out at the new stars. She had not drawn on this window. She was just watching. I sat down next to her. I asked her what she thought. She thought about it the way small children think, with her whole face. Then she said, "This one is bigger than the drawing." I told her that was true. I told her she had been right back on the Far Promise before the jump. Way out had been worth walking. She did not really understand what I meant. That was all right. She would understand later. We would all understand later. For now, the new sky burned outside the window, and there were people to settle and lives to begin, and a galaxy behind us that did not yet know we were gone. I went to my cabin and slept for the first time in 3 days. I dreamed of empty streets and a teacher walking through school 4 times and an old man leaving a screwdriver in the cab of a drill. I dreamed of a child drawing stars on a window. I dreamed of my grandmother who had told me once that the best kind of goodbye is the kind that does not need words. I think we had managed that kind of goodbye. I think we had walked away from the great cold council with our heads up and our voices quiet, and I think when they finally noticed, they would understand in their bones what kind of people they had been talking down to for 9 long years. We had not been small. We had been quiet, and quiet in the end had been enough. My name is THRL Vass, and I am the Inquisitor the Council sent to find out where the humans had gone. I am the one who walked through their empty cities. I am the one who first felt in my own body the strange weight of a planet that should hold 8 billion lives and held none. I am the one who carved that weight into the official record. I will carry it for the rest of my days. The first 3 weeks the council was only annoyed. Ambassador Ortega had not returned at the end of his 72 hours. The recess had ended. The chamber had assembled ready to vote. The pit had been empty. Speaker Vontu had laughed. He had called for messengers to be sent to the human embassy. He had ordered routine inquiries. The routine inquiries had come back strange. The human embassy on Vesh Prime had answered all communications normally. Yes, the ambassador had been delayed. Yes, he would return soon. Yes, the human government wished to extend the recess by another standard week to prepare a full response. Polite, professional, reasonable. Speaker Vontu had granted the extension and gone to lunch. A week became 2 weeks. 2 weeks became 3. The polite answers from the human embassy continued. The polite answers were perfect. They were too perfect. Someone in the council bureaucracy, a junior officer of the Droskin delegation noticed that the phrasing of the responses had not changed in 18 days, the same words, the same sentence structure, the same small pleasantries at the end, as if a machine were answering, as if a script were running. That junior officer wrote a report. The report sat in a queue for 4 days, then it crossed the desk of a senior analyst who read it twice, set down her tea, and sent it to the inquisitor's office. The inquisitor's office sent it to me. I read it on a quiet morning in my private chamber, with the light coming through my window at a long angle. I read it 3 times, then I requested an enforcement squadron and a fast cruiser, and I set out for the human home system to find out what was happening. I expected when we arrived at the edge of the Sol system to be challenged by human patrols. There were always human patrols at the edge of Sol, small ships, stubborn captains, officers who insisted on inspecting our papers and asking polite, pointed questions before letting us pass. It was an old human habit. The council found it irritating. I had always found it privately a little admirable. There were no patrols. We crossed the outer system unchallenged. We passed the orbits of the gas giants. No ships hailed us, no sensors swept us. System was completely quiet. My executive officer, a careful person named Vesh Marin, suggested perhaps the patrols had been pulled in to defend the inner worlds. I told her perhaps. We continued inward. We reached Earth orbit. On the 3rd day, from space, Earth looked exactly as I remembered, blue and white and beautiful in its way. Continents and oceans and weather systems exactly where they should be. The night side of the planet glittered with the lights of cities just as it should. Ship traffic moved in the orbital lanes just as it should. Communication signals washed across our sensors full of the usual human chatter. Just as they should. I gave the order to scan for human life signs. The report came back in 3 minutes. The bridge of my cruiser, a chamber I had commanded for 15 years, fell into a silence I had never heard before. Vesh Marin read the numbers twice very slowly, the way you read numbers when you do not believe them. 0, the scan returned 0, no human heartbeats, no human breath, no human warmth, on a planet that should hold 8 billion lives. The sensors found none. I ordered the scan repeated. I ordered it run on a different system. I ordered a manual checked by a different officer. The numbers did not change. 000. I ordered a landing party. Vesh Marin chose the team herself, 12 troopers, fully equipped plus 2 scientists and a medic. They were experienced. They had been on hard worlds before. They went down expecting a trick, a hidden bunker network, a clever deception. They came back 6 hours later very quiet, and the senior trooper, an old veteran named Carrick, would not meet my eye when he made his report. He told me they had landed in a city called London. He told me they had walked through the streets. He told me the streets were clean, the shops were open, the lights in the windows were on. Newspapers fresh and dated this very day sat in stacks at the corner kiosks. Machine printed during the night and machine delivered before dawn. Cars were parked along the curbs, batteries warm, ready to drive. Coffee shops had hot pots brewed, bakeries had fresh bread cooling on racks, but there was no one. Not one human, not anywhere. In one cafe, Carrick told me they had found a Table set for two, 2 plates of breakfast half eaten, 2 cups of tea. Still warm, the chairs pushed back as if the 2 diners had stood up, said a quiet word to each other, and walked out. The front door, he had touched the tea. It was the right temperature for a meal. Abandoned 20 minutes ago, not 20 minutes, 20 days at least. The kitchen had a timer set running and automated. Cycle, hot tea every 2 hours, hot bread every 4, fresh newspapers every morning. The whole city was running itself. I ordered Carrick to the medical bay to be checked. He was not injured, he was only tired. The kind of tired that I would come to know very well in the weeks that followed. We landed teams in every major city across every continent. Tokyo the same, New York the same, Cairo the same, Buenos Aires the same, Sydney the same, Lagos the same, every city on every continent running smoothly, lit and warm, and tended but holding not one living human being. We landed teams on the Moon, the same on Mars, the same, the colonies on Titan, on Ganymede, on the asteroid stations and the deep mining belts, all the same, lights on, machines working, doors unlocked, coffee warm in the pots, bread fresh in the ovens, and not one human heartbeat anywhere in the system. We spread out across the human galaxy after that. Drosk Station the same, Yalvani 3 the same, Hesper the same, the deep colonies in the second arm the same, every human installation on every world, in every system working perfectly and holding no one. Numbers were impossible. 40 billion human beings across 2 galactic arms. 40 billion, they could not all have left, they could not all have been hidden, they could not all be dead. Because there were no remains, there was nothing, only empty rooms and warm tea, and the soft sound of machines doing the work that human hands used to do. I would never have believed it if I had not walked through one of those rooms myself. On the 11th day, I went down to Earth. Personally, I needed to see it. I landed in the city humans had called New York, in the place they had called the United Nations Plaza, where their old International Council used to meet. It was a building they had treated as important. I thought if there was a message anywhere on Earth, it might be there. I was right, in the center of the plaza. A tall stone obelisk had been raised. It was new. The stone was fresh. It had not been there the last time any Council Inquisitor had visited Earth, which was 11 years ago. It had been carved sometime in the last few months by hands that had taken their time. The carving was deep. The letters were precise. The work was beautiful in the way human work could sometimes be. Beautiful, careful, and quiet, and made to last. I walked up to the obelisk. I read the inscription. It was in the standard council script, perfectly carved, perfectly readable. 3 sentences. They were short. They were not angry. They did not need to be angry. The first sentence said, "We have decided that we no longer wish to be your problem." The second sentence said, "Do not look for us." The third sentence said, "You will not like what you find if you do." I stood in front of that obelisk for a long time. The plaza was silent. The wind moved through the empty streets of New York. Somewhere a few blocks away, an automated bakery began its mid-morning cycle, and the smell of fresh bread drifted past me and was gone. I read the 3 sentences again. I read them a third time. I touched the stone with one long finger, very gently, the way you might touch something that had been built to be touched only by People braver than you. Then I turned around and I walked back to my landing. Kraft and I gave the order to return to Vesh Prime. The journey home was the longest journey of my life, not in distance, in thought. I sat in my cabin for many hours and did nothing but think. I thought about the words on the obelisk. I thought about the empty plate of breakfast in the cafe in London. I thought about the way the lights of those cities had still been burning on the night side as we approached, and how I had assumed all the way down that those lights meant people because I had been raised in a galaxy where lights meant people, and it had never occurred to me that lights could mean something else. Lights could mean a goodbye. Lights could mean a message. Lights could mean a polite, careful goodbye from a species that had decided on its own to be done with us. When I reached Vesh Prime, the council was waiting. Speaker Vontu had assembled an emergency session. 47 delegations sat in their tall seats. The pit at the center of the floor was empty. It would never hold another human again. I think we all understood that. Even then, I walked into the chamber and made my report. I did not soften it. I did not embellish it. I told them what we had found. I told them the numbers. I told them about the tea and the bread in the cars parked along the curbs with their batteries warm. I told them about the obelisk in New York. I read out the 3 sentences exactly as they had been carved. When I finished, the chamber was completely silent, not the polite silence of a council debate, a different silence, a deep one, the kind of silence that comes when 47 civilizations realize at the same moment that they have made a mistake so large that it changes the shape of the galaxy around them. Speaker Vontu rose to speak. He did not have word. His long, pale body trembled just a little in a way I had never seen before. He sat down again without saying anything. No one else stood. The clerks waited at their desks with their styluses ready, and no one gave them anything to record. The session ended in silence. The 47 delegations left in silence. I walked out last through the high doors of the grand hall and into the bright evening of Vesh Prime, and I stood for a long time looking up at the sky where the stars of the human galaxy still burned, and where 40 billion human beings had been and now were not. I thought in that moment that we had not understood them, that all of us in 47 civilizations had spent 100 years and more looking at humanity and seeing what we expected to see, and we had been wrong. Not about a small thing, about everything, about what they wanted, about what they could do, about what they would tolerate before they decided, in their quiet way, that they were finished. Humanity had departed. The council had stood in shock, and as I stood under that sky, I felt for the first time in my long career as an inquisitor that the shock was not just at what they had done. The shock was at us, at what we had been, at what we had not seen when seeing should have been our one job. I did not sleep that night. I do not think Speaker Vontu slept either. I do not think any of us slept in any of our 47 civilizations on the night the truth finally arrived. In the weeks that followed, the silence in the chamber gave way to something else. Argument, blame, fear. Each delegation began to ask very quietly at first, what would happen now? What would happen to all of us in a galaxy where the humans were gone? The answer, as we would soon learn, was nothing good. My name is Corvs, and I am a trade magnate of the Yelvani Commercial Compact. I am Wealthy, I have always been wealthy. My family has held a seat on the compact's High Council for 11 generations. Before the day the humans left, I had never thought about them for more than a few moments at a time. After the day the humans left, I thought about them every hour, and I learned things about my own life that I had not known, and the learning was not pleasant. The first month, no one in my circles took the news seriously. We heard the Inquisitor's report, we read the official transcripts, we saw the pictures of the empty cities, and we mostly shrugged. So the humans had left, strange, dramatic, very like them. We said to each other over dinner to do something so theatrical. They would be back. They always came back. Where else would they go? In the second month, the first trade routes began to fail. It started small. A shipment of rare gases from the third arm did not arrive on schedule. A delivery of medical supplies to the Droskin inner worlds was delayed, then canceled. A pharmaceutical compound that one of our largest hospitals depended on stopped being available with no replacement on the market. None of these things on their own seemed important, but they reports kept coming day after day, quiet, small failures all across the compact, all across the council, all across every civilized space. My senior accountant, a careful man named Veshkor, brought me a chart in the third month. He spread it on my desk and said nothing. I looked at it. It showed the share of inter-arm shipping that had been carried by human vessels. The percentage was 41%. Almost half of every cargo that moved between the galaxies' two main arms had been carried until recently by ships flown by human crews. I had not known this. None of us had known it. The humans had never advertised it. They had simply done the work quietly, cheaply, reliably, while the larger civilizations had argued over politics in the council chamber. The humans had been flying the freight year after year across the deep routes that no one else liked to fly, and no one had noticed because they were not loud about it. They had not asked for honor or recognition. They had only asked for the contracts, and they had filled the contracts, and they had taken their pay and gone home. Now they were gone, and the freight was not moving. Other reports came in. Team of analysts at the Compact Central Research Institute discovered that humans had been the primary translators between the Helithic Conclave and the Droskin Republic for over 60 years. The two species could not stand each other's natural smells. Their meetings always failed within hours because the Helithic chemical sense became confused by Droskin pheromones and vice versa. The humans, who could not smell either species well, had quietly served as middlemen at every important meeting. With humans gone, the two civilizations had attempted to negotiate directly for the first time in decades. 6 meetings in a row had ended in argument. A long, simmering border dispute, which had been managed peacefully for 60 years, suddenly flared into open trade disputes. Another report, the deep radiation mines on the planet Chorus had been worked for 50 years almost entirely by human crews. The radiation was too strong for most species. The pay was excellent, but the work was hard, and only humans had taken it in significant numbers. With the human miners gone, the mines had been forced to switch to automated systems. Automated systems broke down constantly. The output of rare metals from Chorus had fallen by 70% in 3 months. Industries across 6 civilizations were beginning to feel the shortage. I read these reports. I read them in my office. Alone with the door closed, I read them. And I began to feel something I had not felt in a very long time, a small cold weight in my stomach, the weight of a realization arriving slowly in pieces. Over many days, we had not known what the humans did for us. None of us had, because they had never told us, and we had never asked. In my own house, I had a human accountant. Her name was Duran. I never bothered to learn her full name because I called her by her first name, and that seemed enough. She had worked for my family for 20 years. She had a small office on the 3rd floor with a window that looked out over the compact's commercial district. She wore plain clothes. She drank a particular kind of tea. She came in every morning at the same time. She left every evening at the same time. I had thought of her when I thought of her at all as good help, quiet, capable, unimportant. On the day she did not come to work, I had not noticed I was traveling. I returned 3 days later and asked my house manager why my morning reports were late. The house manager told me that Duran had not come in. He had sent inquiries to her apartment. Her apartment was empty. Her things were gone. She had left no notice, no forwarding address, nothing. He had assumed, he said, that I had been informed. I had not been informed. I went up to her office on the 3rd floor. The lamp on her desk was still warm. The teacup was sitting on its saucer. The papers in her tray were stacked neatly. Her ledger book, which she had used for 20 years, was open to the last entry she had made. The entry was dated 4 days earlier. After that entry, the page was blank. She had simply stopped in the middle of her work and walked out. I sat down in her chair. I looked at the ledger. I tried to read it. I could not. The notations were her own system. The cross references pointed to other ledgers, other books, files I did not even know existed. I called in a senior accountant from the compact's central office. He came the next day and spent 6 hours in Duran's small office. He emerged, shaking his head. He told me that Duran had been managing by herself a network of trades, hedges, and currency conversions that involved 12 different markets across 3 civilizations. He told me that the network had been generating for my family profits in the range of 18% annually for nearly 20 years. He told me that without her notes, without her contacts, without the relationship she had built quietly over 2 decades, the network would unravel within weeks. He told me he could try to reconstruct it. He could not promise success. He could not even promise to find all the threads, much less hold them together. I asked him how much would lose. He told me the number was large, larger than I want to write down, larger than I had imagined any single accountant could be worth. I sat in Duran's chair for a long time after he left. I looked at her teacup. I looked at the window where she had watched the commercial district every day for 20 years. I thought about every time I had walked past her desk and not said hello. I thought about every time I had asked for a report and not thanked her when it arrived. I thought about every time I had complained about my human employees in front of her, as if she could not hear me, because in some part of my mind she had not really counted. I had been a fool. We had all been fools. I understood that now, sitting in her quiet office on a planet that had once held a thriving human community of nearly 1 million, and now held only the empty houses where those humans had lived. The compact felt the loss in a thousand ways. Small businesses across the cities had relied on human workers. Restaurants, repair shops, cleaning services, delivery routes. The humans had not been visible, they had been everywhere. They had filled the gaps in our civilization, the gaps we did not know we had, the gaps that other species would not fill because the work was too humble or the hours too long. We had to fill those gaps. Now we tried, we hired from other species, we automated where we could, we adjusted, but the adjustments cost money, they cost time. They cost the steady, quiet competence that the humans had provided without ever being thanked. The compact's economy began to limp. Worst news came from the borders. There had always been 3 rival powers at the edges of council space: the sex hegemony, the pale confederacy, the murmur. For generations, they had been kept out of our buffer regions by a mix of patrols, treaties, and quiet pressure. Surprising part of that pressure had come from human ships, small fleets, fast and unpredictable, that had patrolled the buffer zones for their own reasons, which had often happened to align with ours. The humans had never been formal allies in those patrols. They had simply been there, and now they were not. The pale confederacy moved. Versed. Their probes appeared in the old human colonies. Within 4 months of the departure, they found the empty cities, the running machines, the warm tea. They were not interested in the strangers the way we had been. They were interested in the resources. They began to settle. They began to claim. Within a year, they had set up garrisons on 3 of the 72 former human colonies. Within 2 years, on 12 more. The sex hegemony followed a year later, the murmur a year after that. The buffer regions, which the humans had quietly held for us for 2 centuries, began to fill with hostile fleets. The council met more often now. The chamber was crowded. The pit at the center of the floor remained empty, and we did not speak about it. We argued about the borders. We argued about defense budgets. We argued about whom to blame. We argued more and more about whether the humans could be found and persuaded to return. I attended these sessions. I sat in the compact's box in the 3rd tier, and I watched Speaker Vonto age in front of us. He had been a confident speaker once, smooth and polished. Now his hands shook sometimes. When he held his notes, his voice cracked. He looked more often like a leader who had outlived his certainty. In the 6th year after the departure, the council passed an unprecedented resolution. It was called the Acknowledgement Act. It formally recognized humanity as an equal civilization retroactive to their first contact with us. It removed the pit from the floor of the Grand Hall and replaced it with a circular dais set at the same height as the other delegations. It issued a formal apology in the council's own voice for the conduct of the previous century. The vote was unanimous. There were no humans in the chamber to hear it. The day sat empty. The apology echoed against the high walls and faded away. I voted yes. Of course I voted yes. By that time, every delegation voted yes. We had all learned the lesson. In our different ways, in our different households, in our different industries. We had all sat in a quiet office somewhere, looking at a teacup, and realized what we had lost. The pale confederacy continued to expand. By the 7th year, they were within striking distance of 3 council core worlds. The sex hegemony, sensing weakness, increased their pressure on the second arm. The murmur began to test the third. The council's defenses were stretched thin. Our fleets were not designed for this kind of pressure. We had grown soft behind the buffer the humans had unknowingly provided. In the 8th year, an emergency session of the council debated for the first time openly whether to attempt formal contact with humanity. There was, of course, the problem that we did not know where they were. The folded space gates they had used were unlike anything our scientists had ever seen. We had studied the residual signatures for years. We had narrowed the possible destinations to a region of the second arm of unknown. Thousands of star systems, we could not find them by searching. The region was too large. We had to ask them to find us. We composed a message, a formal request for contact, broadcast on every frequency, repeated in every council language, signed by Speaker Vontu personally on behalf of every delegation. The message was honest. It admitted what we had been. It asked with no conditions for a meeting. We sent the message on the first day of the 9th year. For 5 months there was no reply. In the 6th month, a single short message arrived on every council communications channel at exactly the same time. It came from no traceable source. The signal seemed to begin nowhere and end nowhere, as if it had passed through space we did not understand. The message was 3 sentences long. The first sentence said, "We have considered your request." The second sentence said, "We will send an ambassador." The third sentence said, "The ambassador's terms will be final and not negotiable." The chamber erupted, cheers in many cases, tears in some, relief in all. Speaker Vontu wept openly at his podium, and no one thought less of him for it. I watched from the compact's box. I did not cheer, I did not weep. I thought of Duran's empty office. I thought of her teacup. I thought of the 18 years of profit she had quietly given to my family while I had not even bothered to learn her full name. The humans were coming back, not to live among us only, to meet with us only, to set terms. I knew in my old, slow, tired bones that those terms would not be soft. The humans we had known were quiet, but they had also been patient. Patience, I had learned, is what hard people use when they cannot yet afford to be loud. Now, after nearly a decade of building civilization beyond our reach, after watching us beg them, after watching us collapse without them, they could afford to be loud. They would not be loud. They were never loud, but they would not need to be. I went home that night and I sat in Duran's old office, which I had never reassigned. I had kept the teacup on the saucer. I had kept the ledger open. I had kept the lamp burning. It had become, in some quiet corner of my own house, small shrine to mistake I would carry for the rest of my life. I sat in her chair. I looked out her window at the lights of the city. I waited for the humans to come. My name is Kale Ortega, and I am old now. My hair, what is left of it, is white. My hands shake a little when I write. My back aches when the weather turns. I have lived 18 years in the new system, the one humanity built around the great ringed gas giant, and I have watched my species become something I did not know we could be. And today, for the first time in those 18 years, I am stepping back through the gate. The ship that carries me is called the Quiet Return. It is a small ship by the standards of our new fleet. It does not need to be large. I am one passenger in. My mission is one meeting, and the matter at hand is not war, it is in the older sense of the word business. The pilot of the Quiet Return is a young woman named Helen Brooks. Yes, the same Helen Brooks, who flew me away from Vesk Prime 18 years ago. She is not so young now. She is gray at the temples and steady at the controls. She asked when she heard about the mission to be the one to fly me. I told her she did not need to ask. Seat had been hers from the beginning. We have not spoken much on the journey. There is nothing that needs to be said. We both remember, I think, about the new home behind us. As the gate opens, the three worlds around the gas giant cities humanity has built in 18 years. New London, New Log, New Tokyo, names that carry forward the memory of cities we left behind, children who have never seen Earth and ask sometimes what it smelled like. I tell them it smelled like rain on warm stones. I tell them it smelled like the sea. I tell them it smelled like home until home meant something else, and then it smelled like a place we used to know. We pass through the gate, the stars change, the old constellations slide back into view. Through the viewport there is Vesh Prime, the bright yellow star of the Council world, exactly where I left it 18 years ago, the galaxy I once worked in, the galaxy that once held me in its pit. I do not feel angry looking at it. I am too old for anger. I feel something quieter, a kind of clear, cool readiness, the readiness of a man who has rehearsed a speech for many years and is finally about to deliver it. The Council has sent an honor escort to meet us at the edge of the system, 6 ships. They keep a respectful distance. They do not scan us. They do not signal demands. They only follow at a polite range all the way into Vesh Prime. This is new. This is not how it used to be. When we land at the diplomatic spaceport, there is no pit waiting for me. The pit is gone. They have rebuilt the Grand Hall. The information was in the briefing materials, but seeing it in person is different. Where the pit used to be, there is now a circular diset at the same level as the other delegations. It is built of pale stone. It is plain. It is exactly the right height. It has been waiting for me empty for nearly a decade. I walk into the chamber alone. The same as before. I want it this way. The 47 delegations sit in their tall seats above me. The chamber is silent. The silence is different from before. It is not contempt. It is something I would not have believed possible from these 47 civilizations. It is respect, real respect, the kind that costs the giver something. I step up onto the dais. It is a strange feeling. After all these years of looking up, I am standing eye to eye with them. I look around at the high seats. I see the Helithic conclave, where Speaker Vontu once stood. He is long retired. He died, I am told, 4 years ago. He left a letter behind, addressed to humanity, which I have read. It is honest, it is sad, it is the letter of an old man who finally saw too late what he had been. I do not hold it against him. I forgave him in my heart many years ago, because forgiveness costs the forgiver less than carrying the weight. The new High Speaker is a young woman of the Droskin Republic. Her name is Anath Vel. She rises now to greet me. She bows. She holds the bow for a long moment, longer than protocol requires, and the chamber is silent during it, and I think she has rehearsed this moment as carefully as I have rehearsed mine. When she rises, her eyes are wet. She speaks. First, she speaks for the council. She Apologizes. She apologizes for the pit. She apologizes for the century of small humiliations. She apologizes for the names humanity was called. She apologizes for the resources demanded, the inspections forced, the words said in our hearing as though we could not understand them. She apologizes for everything by name, point by point, item by item for over an hour. She does not hurry, she does not soften, she speaks. Each apology like a stone being laid a wall. When she is finished, she sits down, she waits. I do not speak for a long moment. I'm not being dramatic. I'm simply taking it in. 18 years ago, I stood in the pit below this chamber and listened to Speaker Vontu read charges against my species. Today I stand on days at equal height, and the chamber listens while a new speaker apologizes for the century my people endured. I never thought I would live to see it. I'm very glad I did. I tell them when I begin that I accept their apology. I tell them that humanity accepts it. I tell them that we have not come to punish anyone. We have not come to gloat. We have come because they asked for help, and we have considered the request seriously, and we have decided that the answer can be yes. The chamber breathes out. You can hear it. 47 delegations exhaling at once, but the answer, I say, comes with terms. Terms are not negotiable. The terms are not harsh. They are simply what humanity requires to engage again with this council after what we have learned about ourselves and about you in the years we have been apart. I read out the terms. There are 5 of them. They are short. First, full sovereign recognition of the human civilization with no probationary status, no review period, and no conditions. Second, equal council standing, including a permanent days of equal height in the grand hall, which I see has already been built and which I thank them for. Third, no observer treaties, no inspection right, no resource demands of any kind ever. Humanity will trade where humanity chooses on terms. Humanity sets. Goods will move where they are paid for. There will be no forced sharing. Fourth, the pale confederacy, the sex hegemony, and the murmur will be informed by joint council and human declaration that the buffer regions are now under combined protection. Aggression toward council space will be answered jointly and with seriousness. Humanity will not fight the council's wars for it. Humanity will, however, stand with the council against those who would take advantage of weakness. Fifth, and this is the term that took longest to write, an official record will be entered into the council's permanent archive. The record will describe the century before the departure honestly. It will describe what was done to humanity and what humanity did in response, and what the council learned and what the cost of that learning was. The record will be public. It will be readable by any species anywhere in the galaxy forever. We do not ask for this to shame the council. We ask for it so that no other species ever again is mistaken for livestock by anyone in this chamber. I finish reading. I set down the page. I look up at the 47 delegations. There is a long pause. Then High Speaker Anath rises again. She does not call for debate. She does not call for committee review. She simply asks for the vote. She asks for the yes or no of each delegation by name in order on the record with no abstentions allowed. The vote begins. The Helithic Conclave votes yes. The Droskin Republic votes yes. The Yelvani Commercial Compact votes yes, one by one in order. Every Delegation votes yes, there is no no. There is no abstention, there is not. Even a long pause, the 47 civilizations of the Galactic Council in one unanimous voice accept every term humanity has set. When the vote is finished, the chamber rises and remains standing. The High Speaker says nothing for a long moment, then she says simply, "Welcome back." I bow to the chamber, they bow to me. We sign the documents an hour later, in a smaller room with 3 witnesses from each civilization. Helen Brooks signs as a witness for humanity. Her hands do not shake. I am glad, mine I think would have. The agreement enters into force at the end of the standard week. By then joint declarations have been sent to the Pale Confederacy, the Sex Hegemony and the Murmur. The wording is firm, the wording is short. The wording is in some places my own writing. The 3 rival powers respond. Within days, 2 of them withdraw. Immediately, the third, the Pale Confederacy, takes a little longer, but they withdraw as well. They have heard the stories of how humanity quietly left. They are not eager to find out how humanity loudly returns. I stay on Vesh Prime for another month, finishing details, attending small ceremonies, signing small papers. The chamber treats me well. The hotel rooms are good. The food is interesting. The 47 delegations, one by one, request private meetings with me. I accept each one. They all say versions of the same thing. We were wrong. We are sorry. We are grateful you came back. I tell them all the same thing in return. We accept the apology. We are glad to be here. We will not forget what was, but we will not live inside it. On the last evening before I depart for home, I walk out of the diplomatic quarter and into the city of Vesh Prime. I walk alone. I want to. The streets are busy in the evening. The species of 47 civilizations move past me on their way to dinners and theaters and homes. None of them notice the old human in the plain coat. I am glad I have had enough of being noticed. I walk to the United Council Plaza. It is a wide open space lit by tall lamps surrounded by the great buildings of the council. In the center of the plaza, where there used to be a fountain, there now stands a tall stone obelisk. It is new. The stone is fresh. It was carved by the council last year as part of the acknowledgement act. I walk up to it. I read the inscription. It is in the standard council script, deeply carved, made to last. The inscription is long. It tells the story of the century before the departure. It tells the story of the departure itself in honest words. It tells the story of the empty cities, the running machines, the warm tea. It tells the story of the long silence and the cost of the silence and the lessons learned. At the end, it carries 3 sentences from another obelisk, the obelisk that still stands, I am told, in the old plaza in the empty city of New York, on the empty world of Earth. The first sentence says, "We have decided that we no longer wish to be your problem." The second sentence says, "Do not look for us." The third sentence says, "You will not like what you find if you do." Below those 3 sentences, the council has added 3 more in their own words. The first sentence says, "We found them." The second sentence says, "We did not like what we found in ourselves." The third sentence says, "We will never forget." I read it all twice. I touched the stone the way Inquisitor Thrella Vast told me she once touched the stone of the obelisk on Earth on a day 18 years ago. I stand there for a long time. the plaza moves. Around me, the lamps glow the species. Pass. I think about my grandfather and his small notebook and the lines he wrote. Long before I was born. A people who beg for their freedom will never have it. People who take their freedom must be ready to leave behind everything they were. When the time comes, do not look back. We had not looked back, not for 18 years, and now finally on the right evening in the right plaza in front of the right stone, I looked back just once. Just a little. I lifted one hand, half a wave, half a goodbye, mostly something else. A promise kept, a long road walked. A people who had been called small and were not, a people who had been called primitive and were not, a people who had been called impossible to govern and who had governed themselves all along. Quietly, patiently, in the small spaces between the loud voices of the great council that thought it ruled them, we had left, we had built, we had returned. We had returned on our own terms. I walked back to the diplomatic quarter. I went to my room. I packed my few belongings. The next morning, Helen Brooks brought the quiet return down to the spaceport, and I boarded, and we lifted off through the bright blue sky of Vesh Prime. For the last time, I did not look back at the city. I had already looked back the night before at the only stone that mattered. We passed through the gate. The old stars fell behind. New stars came up. The great ringed gas giant of our home turned slowly into view, banded in soft gold and pale blue. With its 3 lit moons, I saw the lights of New London. I saw the lights of New Logos. I saw the lights of New Tokyo. I saw the lights of every human city we had built in 18 years, glowing across the moons and the orbital stations and the long pale arc of the ring habitats. I thought, this is the answer, not the apology in the grand hall, not the obelisk in the plaza. The answer is this: the lights, the lives, the fact that we built it, the fact that we built it ourselves in the dark without anyone watching, with only the trust of our parents and grandparents to guide us. The fact that we were ready when the loud voice in the pit ordered us to be quieter, to instead be done. Humanity had departed and the council had stood in shock. That was the story for many years. That is the story you will hear if you ask the old ones in the chamber, the ones who remember the day the messengers came back with empty reports, and the chamber fell silent and speaker Vaughan sat down without speaking. But that is only half of the story. The other half is this: humanity returned, and the council this time stood in respect, not because they were forced to, because they had learned in their bones what they had not seen when seeing was their only job. And we, the humans, returned the respect. We did not punish. We did not gloat. We sat at our new days, and we wrote our terms, and we signed our names, and we shook the hands of the chamber, and we went home. That is the whole story. That is what we crossed to arms of the galaxy to teach them. That is the lesson written in the only way. Some lessons can be written in silence, in patience, in the long quiet leaving of a people who had been pushed for the last time, and who left, and who built, and who came back in their own time, by their own road, on their own terms. I came home to the great ringed gas giant, and Helen Brooks set the quiet return down on the pad outside New Geneva, and my family was waiting on the pad to meet me. My niece, who had been 8 years old on the morning of the summons, was a woman now with children of her own. She hugged me. She cried a little. She asked me, was it worth going? I told her yes. I told her it was worth every step. That night I sat on the porch of my small house in New Geneva and looked up at the new sky, the new stars, the stars that belonged for the first time in our history as a species only to us. I thought about Speaker Vontu, who had been my opponent and who had died. Regretting what he had been, I thought about Thraz, the Inquisitor, who I had met at last in person and who turned out to be a thoughtful old woman with quiet eyes. I thought about Corvash of the Yilvani, who had asked me in his private meeting whether I had ever known a human accountant named Duran, and who had wept when I told him yes, my mother had known her, and Duran had retired to a small house in New Tokyo with a teacup just like the one she had left behind. I thought about all of them. The old enemies, the old colleagues, the old friends I had never quite been allowed to have on the wrong side of the pit. Then I thought about my grandfather and his notebook and the last line he had written in it, "We are not a small people, we are only a quiet one, and when quiet ends, the loud will learn that they were never as loud as they thought. The loud had learned, the quiet had ended just long enough to teach the lesson, and had then resumed the way it always had in the small, honest spaces of a small, honest people who had finally, after a long time, come into our own. I sat on the porch for a long time. The new stars burned above me. I was very old. I would not see most of what came next. That was all right. The road from here would be walked by others. I closed my eyes. I let the night settle on me. I let my hand rest on the wooden arm of my chair, on the new world we had built, under the new sky we had earned. Humanity had departed. Humanity had returned. The galaxy had learned, and I at last was home.